Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name's Kaylee and these are my books. So today's video is my November wrap-up. I once again did not do a mid-month wrap-up. I just was on vacation during the time when I should have been able to do the mid-month wrap-up. And of course with the mid-month wrap-ups, you can't film them in advance because otherwise they're not mid-month wrap-ups, they're just the first week. In December though, mid-month wrap-ups will be back, hopefully, because it's too many books to talk about in one video for the full month wrap-up. But this month is a bit better because I read 25 books, and so that's, it's average for me, but it's slightly lower on the average. I feel like I generally read around 25 to 30 books each month, so 25, it's doable for this one video. My page count though is actually the same as in months where I've read 40 books, but it's because I read a lot of chunky fantasy books this month. In fact, I resurrected my Storygraph account, so I'll leave my Storygraph link down in the description box below if you have Storygraph. It's just an alternative to Goodreads. I still use Goodreads, but Storygraph gives me fun stats, which is why I know my page count was similar to the months where I read 40 books. But it also lets me know what genres I read the most of, and I actually read the most of fantasy this month, and fantasy just tends to be longer, hence the page count being super high, with the average books being on the low average side. My average rating this month was very, very high though. I had an average rating of 4.2, and out of all the different ratings, I had the most 5 stars. But you'll see that the reason why I had the most 5 stars is because I ended up doing a lot of rereads in November. I feel like in November I was constantly on the edge of a slump, and so I just kind of fell back into some familiar old favorites and was rereading a bunch of books that I knew I would really enjoy. That way I wouldn't go into a full slump. But it kind of skewed the ratings because I have a ton of 5-star books, but it's because I did a ton of rereads. So I'm gonna structure this video like I always structure my wrap-ups and my mid-month wrap-ups, where I start with the 1 stars and I work my way up to the 5-star reads. And I did have some 1 stars this month. And by some, I mean I had one 1-star book. So my one and only 1-star book was Once Upon a Dream by Sierra Simone. I just really did not like this book. This is a romance book, fairy tale retellings. It's not really romance though, it's pure erotica. There's not a plot in these, and they're very short. So I think the whole book was around like 200 and something pages, but there's 3 different stories within that. And even of those 200 and something pages, a lot of the pages are like snippets of other stories that I just kind of skipped because they're like promos for you to get to read other Sierra Simone books. So of the actual stories themselves, I feel like there's only 150 pages of content. They were about 50 pages each. And each one was a very, very, very loose retelling of a fairy tale. But again, like, you shouldn't go into this thinking, fairy tales, because it was hard to even see the retelling. It was basically just a big sex scene for 50 pages. Which, if you're into erotica, like, maybe you would like this. But the reason why I'm giving it 1 star and not 2 star, because typically I give books 2 stars when I dislike them, but I don't think they're objectively bad. And I give books 1 stars when I dislike them and I think they're objectively bad. And I think this one is objectively bad because I just thought the sex scenes were so cringy too. Like, I didn't think they were hot at all. They were just boring and cringy, and like, nobody would act that way. And I know in all romance and erotica there's some suspension of disbelief, but it was too much for this book and I just couldn't get into it at all. I did finish it, but I should have DNF'd it. But it's just one of those things where there are the 3 different stories, so each time I kept thinking, maybe I'll like the next story more, and I did not. So I'm giving this 1 star. This is just purely an erotica novel, and I wouldn't even recommend it for people that like erotica novels, honestly. It was just cringy and bad. So working our way up the star ratings, I have a 2-star book, and this is a incredibly disappointing 2-star book because I was so hyped for it. I was so excited. This was one of my most anticipated releases, and this is Lisa Unger's Secluded Cabin Sleep 6. This, as you can probably tell from the title, is a thriller book. The premise is we basically follow this family who goes to a secluded cabin to have a little family bonding trip right after Thanksgiving, and they start getting picked off one by one. However, this premise, I don't think is truly accurate to the story because the cabin part, the secluded cabin, is only a small portion of the story, and there's so many other threads and directions that the story takes us that I just found the story so unfocused with way too many different threads. And it wasn't even like fun red herrings where I'm like, oh, maybe it's this person, maybe it's that person. It was just disorganized in my opinion. And certain plot lines that I was really invested in kind of went nowhere, and other plot lines that I wasn't as invested in ended up being the main ones. And it was just too messy. It was a very, very messy book. So some pros with this book: there is a DNA plot line where basically the drama that this family is experiencing is they all do some DNA testing, and basically there's some drama with a sperm donor and a bunch of other half-siblings, and the half-siblings seem to be getting targeted by killers as well, so there's some interest there. And then there's also a thread of the person that owns the secluded cabin being kind of sketchy too. So there's DNA, sperm donor, family testing drama. There is cabin owner being creepy drama. There's the secluded cabin itself where the family members turn up and drama happens. And then there's family drama before they go to this cabin as well. In fact, they don't really go to the cabin until about 20% of the way through the book, which I wish we started at the cabin. And again, there was just too many different focal points, and I found that we were too zoomed out because we had all these different focal points. I wanted the book to focus on one and zoom way in on that one plot line instead of switching around so much. So I'm giving it 2 stars because there were parts that were really enjoyable. So it's not a book that I objectively think is terrible. It's just it could have been so much better. But I understand why some people would enjoy this story. Next up, I have 2 3 stars, first of which is A Marvelous Light. Here is my copy here. I almost forgot I even had it because it was high up on a shelf, but I do have a copy, so here is The Marvelous Light. It is once again the most beautiful book I own, but unfortunately I only gave it 3 stars, so it is not a new favorite. It was a fairly enjoyable 3-star book though. It's just, it didn't stick with me at all, and I don't always fault books if they don't stick with me because sometimes it's a me issue. But this book, I don't think it was a me issue. I think it was really just the book being nice and fun and light, and that's about it. Like, I wanted more substance to it. The premise is our main character, a man called Robin, gets accidentally inducted into this job that throws him into a magical world he had no idea existed, and it seems like he might be cursed. So our other main character, a man called Edwin, kind of takes Robin under his wing and shows him around the magical world, and they're trying to work out why he is cursed and how he even got this job position if he didn't even know magic existed. There is a romance between these 2 men, and it was quite a sweet, nice romance to read about. I think my problem with this book was that I just really didn't care about the world building or the magic itself. It was a bit too quirky for me at times. I guess I wanted us to focus more on the romance than we did because that was what was my favorite part of this book. And I would say it's kind of an equal split between the fantasy elements and the romance elements, and the fantasy elements were just not doing it for me. Quirky, whimsical fantasy is a bit hit or miss for me, and this one was more of a miss. However, the romance, like I said, I absolutely adored, so it had to get at least a 3-star rating because I did have a positive opinion about this book. It just wasn't a super strong positive opinion. Next up in the 3-star category is A Demon's Horns by Mary Misty. This is a Kindle Unlimited reverse harem school setting magic fantasy demon smut romance. So basically we follow our main character who goes to this demon school, and they all go to these demon school when they become adults because they need to awaken their demon magic, and the best way to awaken demon magic is when you're surrounded by a bunch of other demons. So basically when all the demon children become adults, they all go to a school to try to get their magic to awaken. And there are 7 different types of demons. They all follow under the 7 deadly sins. So we have sloth demons, we have envy demons, we have wrath demons, and so on and so forth. And basically our main character is a bit of a chosen one at this school when her magic emerges. And so she assembles a reverse harem of male demons, all from different demon castes, to help her survive and navigate her chosen one powers. This is smutty, but it does have a full plot with it, which is my preferred type of smutty romance. I love the plot with it. And it gets 3 stars because I did have a lot of fun with this book, but there were some like objective issues with how some of the characters were a bit flat, you know, like we get so many love interests introduced into this one book, and it just wasn't long enough for us to really know each of the love interests. and I felt like we were supposed to know and care about them all more than I did. And I found the main character a bit passive at times. I mean, the amount of time she runs away from conflict is very high. I was like, okay, I understand running away at the beginning, but I mean, how many times are we going to continue to see you run away? Literally, I mean, she's literally running away from conflict. An argument happens and she's out of there. So I would have appreciated maybe a more active female protagonist. She does have some active moments, but I just felt like the progress was like a step forward and 2 steps backward. I will be continuing on with the series because ultimately I think the world is a lot of fun to read about, but it's not a book that is objectively great, you know? I'm hoping it improves as the author writes more, because I think this is the author's first book and she has a ton of books published on KU. So I'm assuming that the author's writing will improve as we move forward. Alright, so next up I have 2 3.5 books, first of which is Glow, and this is book 4 in the Plated Prisoner series, which is a fantasy romance series. And I'm very sad that this book was 3.5 stars because this I consider one of my favorite fantasy romance series. But unfortunately, this recent book I had a lot of issues with. I had a lot of really, really great moments too. So this is one of those 3.5 books that I didn't feel the same throughout the book. Instead, there were some moments that felt like 5-star moments for like 100 pages, and then there were some moments for like 50 pages that I would hate and it felt like 1-star moments. So it was kind of like a give and take throughout the book. I actually started this book in November and read the first 80 pages in November. No, sorry, not November. In October, I started the book and read the first 80 pages in October and hated the first 80 pages and put it down. I was so bored. And then I re-picked it up in November and pushed past it. And I did end up enjoying it a lot more. And there were moments, especially towards the end, that I was loving. It's just, my issues with this series is I feel like there's barely any female friendship. We get like 1 female character in this recent installment that isn't an evil villain, but the interactions are very limited and quite stilted. And most of our main character, Oren's, like friends are all men. And the only other female characters we have are kind of crappy, like evil villains. I'm like, dude, can't they have some critical thinking? Like, I don't know, the reasons why these women are villains and hate our main character just weren't compelling for me. And I was disappointed that some of them became villains because I was hoping we would see some team up moments. And then also our main character, Oren, like we're in book 4 now. I know she had a lot of trauma to deal with, okay? She had an incredibly traumatic beginning in book 1, but we're in book 4. I just want her to be a bit more active than she is. I felt like at the end of book 3, I thought we were moving towards a fully active female main character, but then we had a lot of backtracking, and I know that's probably realistic to trauma, but for me, being a reader of this series, I just really want to see her be more active instead of kind of being passed along by all these male characters being told what she has to do and what she has to accomplish. You know, I want to see her be the active one with the plan for once. So while I still really enjoy the series and I love the characters, and there were so many moments that I adored in this book, those issues kind of brought it down for me to be a 3.5. And I can't really tell you the premise of Glow because it's book 4 in a series, but this is a King Midas retelling fantasy romance where basically we have Oren, our main character, who is all gold, and she is the pet of King Midas, and she's kept in this golden cage. And she has a terrible life. King Midas totally sucks. He's really abusive. And it's just about her kind of figuring out that she is in this abusive relationship and she needs to break free. The next 3.5 book I have is The Perfect Ruin. This is a thriller and I had so much fun with this thriller. Ultimately, it's 3.5 just because I'm going to forget it. In fact, I kind of already have forgot it. As soon as I finished the book, I was like, that was a fun time, but nothing significant happened. There was nothing totally revolutionary in this thriller to make it stand out amongst other thrillers, in my opinion, and therefore it is pretty forgettable. But I would highly recommend this book just for an easy popcorn read thriller, because it was thoroughly entertaining all throughout. 3.5 means I had a very fun time with it. And when I say nothing significant happens in this thriller, I mean nothing significant enough to make this thriller stand out amongst other thrillers. But basically, this is a revenge thriller with a twist where this woman believes that this other woman has completely ruined her life, so she is going to infiltrate the other woman's life and pretend to be someone else and become friends with the other woman so that she can take her down. But there's some other things going on, and the woman who thinks that her life was ruined by this other woman might not have the correct grasp on what really happened. And so basically it's a domestic thriller, but it's not centered around a husband and wife. It's mostly centered around the dynamic of the friendship between these two women, and it's a lot of fun to read about. Next up, moving into my 4-star reads, first of which is a graphic novel / comic series. This is volume 1 of Destroyer. So this I actually read because I decided to teach it in my class, but this is the first time I've ever read this, so I figured I would talk about it here because it's not actually a classic. It was written and published in 2020. Actually, I don't know if it was written. It was published in 2020. Could have been written earlier. But basically, this is an extension of Frankenstein. So this is basically a graphic novel / comic that is about Frankenstein's descendants, Frankenstein being the scientist who created the monster. And so this graphic novel follows the monster who has survived since the book of Frankenstein's publishing into our current modern day life, along with Frankenstein's descendants creating a modern monster. And I think this graphic novel is so much fun to read about. I don't think you need to have read Frankenstein to enjoy this graphic novel. It's very gory, and it classifies in the horror genre. Like, there's a lot of gore in here. But it's horror sci-fi, so I think it's a lot of fun. And it deals with a lot of social issues today, such as police brutality, racist stereotypes, the moral limitations of science, animal cruelty, global warming, environmental activists, and so on and so forth. There's a lot packed into this short first volume of a comic series, and I thought it was incredible. I'm giving it 4 stars just because it is so short. It's hard to give something that short 5 stars, but this is one of those series, as I continue on with future volumes, I could group together as a 5-star series. But just volume 1, this first installment, is 4 stars, a solid 4 stars. Next up is Craven Manor by Darcy Coates. I had to fit in another Darcy Coates book. This is actually a buddy read with Mel, Cassidy, and Lexi, although I don't think Lexi has still finished it. She needs to get on that. But I'm giving Craven Manor 4 stars. It was a thoroughly enjoyable Darcy Coates book. But there are other Darcy Coates books that I've given 5 stars, so therefore it's not a favorite Darcy Coates book, but it was a very, very enjoyable Darcy Coates. And Darcy Coates is kind of known to be a cozy horror writer, but it's still very much horror, okay? There are horror in these books. The cozy aspect is really just because Darcy Coates creates this really enticing atmosphere of this spooky, haunted house. And so it's a bit cozy to sink into this atmosphere and just experience Darcy Coates writing. Because Darcy Coates, I've said this before, I will continue to say it, she is the queen of atmosphere. Now, I will say Craven Manor, the atmosphere wasn't as impressive as other books, but I still think if you compare Craven Manor to other horror books that are published, it is an incredibly impressive atmosphere. It's just if you're comparing Craven Manor to other Darcy Coates books, it is on the less impressive side. But basically the premise of Craven Manor is we follow our main character, who is a man in this story. Usually Darcy Coates writes female main characters, but Craven Manor follows a man who gets offered the position to be a groundskeeper at this castle, house, mansion situation that no one seems to live in. And it's really creepy because he just gets these letters randomly throughout the house. They almost seem magical, of telling him what to do, and his payment is in these weird gold coins. So everything is just very odd. But this man didn't have a lot of options. He was on the verge of being without a house, without a home, and therefore he takes this position because he is able to stay in a cottage that's on the grounds of the mansion that he's taking care of. But in Darcy Coates fashion, this grounds seems to be haunted. So again, I had a lot of fun with it. If you like other Darcy Coates books, I think you're going to enjoy Craven Manor. The reason why it didn't get a full 5 stars is just because I think our main character in this book was a bit less compelling than other main characters we get, and the atmosphere was just a bit less enticing than other Darcy Coates books, but still, I highly recommend Craven Manor for a fun, spooky, haunted time. Next up in my 4-star category is The Shadow in the Ember. This is a fantasy romance book, and this is actually book 1 of a prequel series to From Blood and Ash. So it's set in the same world of From Blood and Ash, but it's set, I don't remember how many years back, but maybe like 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, who knows? It's set back quite a bit of time from Blood and Ash. And in this book, we follow our main character of Sarah, and she is supposed to be for the primal god of death, and she has spent her whole life preparing to be his consort. And she's secretly been training, though, by her family to kill him because everyone in the human world believes that he is responsible for this plague that is upon her world. So she has been trained like a lamb for the slaughter to go in and kill the primal god of death while being his wife, because they think that she'll be able to get some weaknesses if she is married to him. Now, when he shows up, though, to claim her as his consort, he rejects her. And then her family begins to hate her because they think there's something wrong with her that meant he won't claim her, and therefore all the plague upon the world and upon the farmlands is now her fault. So she has this horrible family situation where she's being abused left, right, and center, and everyone in the world blames all of these deaths and starvation on her. And so she just is going out living her life. She has this extensive training. She's a badass, and she meets this man out in the world that seems to keep popping up. And together they tend to investigate these deaths that are happening, these weird deaths that seem to be zombie-esque deaths. And of course, there's a lot of hidden identities there. Their romance is so good. And the deaths are gory and gross and so fun to read about. Like, there were a lot of horror elements in this fantasy romance. It is very steamy, but it has a full plot and lots of world building. If you like From Blood and Ash, I think you will really enjoy A Shadow in the Ember. I liked A Shadow in the Ember a bit more than From Blood and Ash, although I love both of them. But A Shadow in the Ember is a lot like From Blood and Ash. It's just kind of repackaged slightly differently. But I enjoyed the repackaging. I thought it was a super fun read, and I highly recommend this to fantasy romance lovers. Next up in my 4-star category is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. Quite a mouthful, that title. But this is a cozy fantasy romance book. And the fantasy elements are like barely there. It's just witches, you know? So it's fantasy in my opinion because there's magic, there's witches, there's the secret magical society, but it's urban fantasy because it's set in our real life society. But basically, I think even if you don't like fantasy, you could still enjoy this book. And this is a grumpy sunshine romance where basically these people that live out of the city limits in this big manor have 3 young witches, 3 children witches they're having a very tough time controlling because they are not also witches themselves. And so they're in search of a nanny, a live-in nanny, to help their witch children. They're not the children's parents, they just live there kind of as caretakers, but they're in search of an actual witch to help them with the children because they have no idea how to control the magic. But finding a witch is quite difficult because witches in this world, while they do exist, there's no secret witch societies together because it's dangerous for witches to exist in the same place. So therefore, if you are a witch, you kind of live in hiding without a lot of contact to other magical people. But basically, this pseudo family finds our main character because she posts witch videos on social media that look fake to everyone else, but to them who know real magic, they can spot the real magic. And so they invite her to come be a nanny for these children. So she moves to this house, becomes a live-in nanny, tries to take care of the kids, but the groundskeeper there is very, very protective of the kids, and they just butt heads quite a bit. Him and her, the witch. So she is the sunshine, he is the grumpy, and it's about their love story and about this found family. I thought this book was very sweet, very wholesome, very cozy, and I had a great time with it. I'm giving it 4 stars because it's not like I was obsessed with it, and honestly, I thought this book was a sapphic romance, so I got a little bit sad when it was a male-female romance, but it's okay, it was still a great read, and I highly recommend this for people that want cozy fantasy or people that want sweet romances. Okay, my last 4-star book kind of spoils what a lot of the 5-star books are, but it is Tower of Dawn, which is part of the Throne of Glass series. I have it here. I did a full reread of the Throne of Glass series in November, and Tower of Dawn is just always my least favorite because I hate Chaol, and Tower of Dawn focuses entirely on Chaol without any of the other characters that I care about. Especially with the cliffhanger at the end of Empire of Storms, it's really unsatisfying to then jump into Tower of Dawn and have to suffer through this whole book to get to more content of the characters that I like. But on reread, so the first time I read this, I hated it. I really was disgusted by the book because I also didn't realize going into this book the first time I read it that we don't follow the other main people. So I was incredibly disappointed. But now knowing that going into this book and just trying to appreciate this book and the characters that are within this book without expecting the other characters that I care about to pop up, I did have a much better time with it. I'm giving it 4 stars. I really enjoyed the romances that are in this book, and I really enjoyed how Sarah J. Maas dealt with the initial romance existing and how it was explored in this book. I'm being very vague for no spoilers. And so while it still is my least favorite, because every other book in that series got 5 stars, and you'll see when we move on to the 5-star category, this book getting 4 stars is a massive improvement from what I thought when I first read this book. So I'm happy to report that on reread, this book is much better than I initially thought. All right, so next up, I have 2 4.5-star books, and the first of which is The Shadow of What Was Lost. This is an adult epic fantasy book that I read with Backlist Book Club. I'm not going to talk too much about this because we have a full live show dedicated to it, which I will leave linked in the description box below. But basically, I had a great time with this book, 4.5 stars, just because I felt like I needed a little bit more explanation for it to be bumped up to the full 5 stars, but 4.5 stars is obviously an incredible rating. I had an amazing time with it. I will be reading book 2 in this trilogy in the month of December, so I'm excited to continue on. But yes, had a great time with it. Check out the live show. Even if you haven't read this book, we did a spoiler-free section of the live show, so check out the live show for more information. The next 4.5-star book I read is We Spread, which is a horror book. This is a novella, and this was a horror book basically about the horrors of dementia and Alzheimer's. We follow the point of view of an elderly woman who is experiencing dementia, and basically we're experiencing life through her eyes as she struggles with this illness. And it's basically horrifying how her reality is shaped by this illness and how scary everything is when you can't trust your own memory. This is definitely a weird read. It's not gonna feel like your traditional horror book, because really the horror is just emphasized in her point of view and her experiencing reality, but there's not necessarily any horrific things going on outside of her own illness. So if you want a really fast-paced horror book, this is not for you. But if you want a slower literary horror that just explores dementia and the horrors of not trusting your own memory, this book does it really well in my opinion. All right, so now moving into the 5 stars, I have quite a few 5 stars. I have 12 5 stars, but 5 of them were Throne of Glass rereads. So let's first talk about those. I read all of these Throne of Glass books along with Kingdom of Ash, which I unfortunately don't own the last book in this series, which was so sad. I did the reread all through Audible. So I had already read Assassin's Blade and Throne of Glass itself in other months. And then my audiobook hold came in for Crown of Midnight down here, which is book number 2. And I was just so obsessed and I got so invested back in the series that I then started a binge where I went immediately into Heir of Fire, number 3, and then Queen of Shadows, and then Empire of Storms, and then Tower of Dawn, and then Kingdom of Ash. So, yeah, these all got 5 stars, along with Kingdom of Ash, which I don't own, also got 5 stars. I had an amazing time with this reread, and it really cemented the fact that Throne of Glass is, in fact, one of my favorite fantasy series, which I wasn't sure if it would hold up on reread, but I just got so sucked back in. I love the characters in this book. I love the badass moments that this book gives us. I love the romance all throughout these series. It has it all. It really has it all. And I highly recommend Throne of Glass as a fantasy series because I think it holds up. Now, it's difficult for me to for sure tell you that you will like it because I have so much nostalgia wrapped up in this series because this used to be my favorite series when I was like 18, when it was still coming out. But as a 26-year-old woman, I still freaking loved these books. And so I would say give it a shot, even if you kind of feel like you maybe missed the prime time to read these. Still give it a go. You might love them just as much as I did. Another 5-star book I had was Hidden Pictures. This book was so much fun because I actually buddy read this with my mom where we only read 40 pages a day. And so it took me a while to get through it because of that buddy read, but it was so much fun to then dissect each of the 40 pages that we read. And this is a thriller/horror book that basically is the premise of this woman who used to be a drug addict who has been sober for a while now gets a job as a nanny for this pretty rich family. But the child, the little boy that she's nannying, named Teddy, is drawing really, really disturbing pictures. And so the nanny begins to believe that the house is haunted. And there are so many illustrations throughout this book. Like, it's not just like one or two. Sometimes we get full pages of like 20 pages in a row of just a bunch of kids' drawings. So here at the beginning is one of the kids' drawings, and you can kind of see how creepy they are. And the drawings, I love when a book does something I haven't seen before. And I haven't seen kids' illustrations being used in a book as part of the plot as much as is in Hidden Pictures, because we get so many pages of these illustrations. I just had so much fun with that format, that structure of the book. And yeah, 5-star read, super compelling thriller. I had a great time with it. The next 5-star book I have to talk about is Ashes of the Sun, and this is a fantasy book that has a lot of sci-fi elements, where basically we have two main characters, a brother and a sister. The sister's name is Maya, the brother's name is Geyer. Maya basically gets kidnapped by the Empire when she's 5 years old because she displays magical abilities, and she becomes what's equivalent to like a Empire's police. Think like a stormtrooper. There has a lot of Star Wars elements in here as well. And then Geyer, who has to grow up knowing that the Empire kidnapped his sister, becomes a rebel. And he becomes a quite notorious rebel with a whole gang of people that kind of look up to him. And so basically these two siblings, Maya is fighting for the Empire and Geyer is fighting against the Empire. And it's the drama of, will they meet up again? Will they try to kill each other? Will they hate each other? If they love each other, how will that even work if they're on the two different sides? I loved it. This has some romance in it too, some sapphic romance, which is so much fun to read about. The characters are so fun and compelling in this story, and it's just very approachable. I know this is kind of chunky. I mean, it's not that long. It's like 550-ish pages. But like, you should not be intimidated by this book. It's so readable. It's so easy to read. The world building is very easy to get through, and the characters and the like funny character moments are really the core of the story. So I highly recommend Ashes of the Sun. Another 5-star read I had is House of Hunger by Alexis Henderson. This was so good. This is a gothic horror book that has kind of vampire adjacent characters. So basically we follow our main character, and she is having this really horrible life situation. She works a job that has incredibly long hours and very little pay, and then she goes home to her brother, who is addicted to drugs and is quite abusive to her. So basically her home environment and her work environment just are both abusive and both horrible. So she takes the position to be a blood maid, which has a lot of negative connotations associated with it, but it's not like this woman has a lot of options. And a blood maid is basically someone who works for a very upper class family and lives in their mansion with them and gives the nobility their blood to drink. They're not technically vampires, they're just like rich people who like doing weird rich people things, which includes drinking blood. There is some slight magic in here, but it's very slight. And basically it's just about her plight as a blood maid, and when things start to get very dark, secrets become unraveled, the nobility begins to seem quite monstrous. The atmosphere in this book was so nice to read. This took me a bit longer than anticipated to read, but every time I picked it up, I just wanted to slow down and really savor the book. So yeah, I absolutely loved this. I think Alexis Henderson is one of my favorite authors now because I loved Year of the Witching, and now I've loved House of Hunger, so she's definitely an author that I will be automatically buying any future releases from. And I highly recommend House of Hunger for a gothic, slow burn, character focused, with creepy but yet beautiful imagery throughout. Next up is Spinning Silver. This was another book club read where I read it with the Femme Aficionados book club, which we did a whole live show on this, again with a spoiler-free section, so I'll leave that linked below. But to sum it up, this is a fairy tale, polar fantasy, very cold atmosphere with fairy tale influences from both Rumpelstiltskin and the original Cinderella. This was a reread for me. I gave it 5 stars. The first time I read it, I gave it 5 stars. The second time I read it, for full thoughts, check out the live show. linked in the description box below. Next up, for 5-star, I read my very first manga, and it was Spy X Family, the first volume, and I loved it so much. I really need to continue on with the volumes. It was so enjoyable to read. So basically we follow this spy. He is a man, he is a spy, and he needs to get a fake family to infiltrate this noble upper class school society. And so he adopts a daughter from an orphanage, a fake daughter, but she is a telepath, but he doesn't know that she can read his mind. And he is keeping his spy identity secret, but of course she can read his mind, so she knows that he's a spy. And then he gets a fake wife because she needs a fake mother, but the fake wife happens to be a secret assassin. So they all have these identities that are all secret from each other, except for the young daughter who's like 5 years old. She knows both of their secrets because she can read their mind. And it's just so wholesome and so funny and so fun. I loved it. Next up, a 5-star read was Gallows Hill by Darcy Coates, and this is my favorite Darcy Coates of all time now. This is about a haunted winery, and basically a woman who is estranged from her parents. Her parents die, they own the winery, and they leave the winery to her in her will, so she moves into the winery, but there's so many creepy things happening at the winery, and it seems like she is unable to leave. The atmosphere in this book was top tier. The ending was so freaking good, and I did have some doubts about halfway through the book about the logic, but all those doubts got explained by the end, so it's one of those books where you just need to trust the process. This is my favorite Darcy Coates of all time. The atmosphere shined so bright. Absolutely loved it. I highly, highly recommend Gallows Hill. Next up, I read The Obsession, which is a YA revenge thriller, and I had such an amazing time with this book. So basically, this book is about about a girl. She's a teenage girl who has an abusive stepfather, and she has a stalker teenage boy who kind of blackmails her into being into a relationship with him. And so she has these two men that are trying to control her in her life, and she's fed up, and so she's gonna do some things about it. I thought this book was so satisfying, so fun to read. We got some point of views from the stalker, and it reminded me a lot of the book You, and I love stalker point of views. They're just so creepy. So I thought this book was so compelling, so fast-paced, so readable. I read it in one sitting. Highly, highly recommend Obsession. If you like YA thrillers, but even if you just like revenge thrillers, this YA one hits hard. All right, those are all the books I read. This video was way longer than I thought it was going to be. I've been filming for 50 minutes. I'm sure I've been able to shorten it down, but the raw footage right now is over 50 minutes long, and I'm so tired of talking. But let me know in the comments down below what you read in November. I obviously had a great reading month because I had so many 5-star books, found so many new favorites, and had such an amazing time rereading the whole Throne of Glass series. And thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give me a like and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you next time. Bye!